On the budget, let's bring in Labor MP Ed Husic joining us now from our Canberra studio. Mr. Husic, thanks very much for your time this afternoon. One of the concerns in the market, one of the ongoing concerns amongst business is the inability for legislation to get through the Senate, to make it past the crossbenchers, to make it past the opposition. Does this budget look like facing similar challenges from your perspective?
Well, I certainly respect and understand those concerns, but then again, when you look at the history of our parliaments, we've always had challenges with Senates not necessarily reflecting the colour of the lower house in political terms. The only time that it really in recent memory did so was with John Howard, and so it really becomes a question of the competence, skill and dexterity of a government to be able to put forward a set of policies that it will be able to negotiate through the Senate. And the difficulty this government had is that there was a complete and utter inconsistency with what they were proposing at the election versus what came out in the budget 8 months' time. So in that regard, you have to wait and see what, once we analyse the detail, because again there's a lot of gloss on many of the announcements. The detail tends to scrub away that veneer. But there are some things we're prepared to work on. There are some things that we feel strongly about, and there are others that we'll see where compromise can actually get us.
And of course, it should mention Opposition Leader Bill Shorten will be giving his budget reply tomorrow night. From what you have seen, though, and certainly listening to Shadow Treasurer Chris Bowen, the small business package has been welcomed.
Yes, largely because it in many respects reflects, James, the type of approach we took in this area when we were in government. We'd put in place very similar measures, although the quantum is completely different, and this government on getting into office got rid of them all. And not only did they get rid of them, they made the changes retrospective on those small businesses, which was terrible. And now what we're seeing is a massive overcorrection by the amount that's put in. I have genuine concerns about what the story that we're not being told. We've had two very quick cuts to interest rates because the Reserve Bank, looking down the lens of the future, recognises that growth isn't going to be as strong as it should be. And while we had some optimistic, very optimistic forecasts in this budget about nominal growth, for example 5% in a few years' time, you see all this spend on these small business measures, James, that are being brought forward now with only a 2-year time frame from start to finish, and you've got to wonder what is sitting in the economy down the track that they're so concerned about that they have to bring forward all this spending. And there is an overcorrection that we're seeing at the moment as well. You
touched on a point that's certainly being spoken about quite a bit today, and that is the economic projections, particularly heading out into 2016, 2017 and beyond. A big increase in terms of economic growth, whether it be nominal or real GDP. Sol Leslie, a couple of the other big bank economists, certainly suggesting very optimistic, perhaps a little bit too optimistic. But is that the difficulty when you're dealing with Treasury numbers that do account for such a wide margin of error? Certainly it had been an issue for previous governments on both sides.
I think the concern has been, you're right to absolutely right to reflect on the fact that there has been, in times past, the difficulty between forecast and actual, and that is, regardless of the politics, has been something very difficult to navigate for both sides of politics. I would have imagined that the expectation would be to test some of those figures. I mean, 5% nominal growth in a few years' time does seem very, very rich, and we are continuing to experience economic growth that is well below trend. As I reflected a few moments ago, we've had to have 2 interest rate cuts because the Reserve Bank, looking ahead, is worried about where growth's headed. I have no issue, for example, in terms of some of the, and I think a lot of, on the Labor side, quite happy to see small business get support, but again, we're having to see a whole lot of spending initiatives overturned. There's about $9 billion, I think, off the top of my head, because of bad decisions that were made in the last budget, and we're overcorrecting now to fix that up, and then expecting some sort of massive growth figure down the track. Well, let's wait and see.
Were there missed opportunities, do you think, in this budget, Mr. Husic?
Certainly, I am concerned about the fact that we still don't have, in the education space, we still have massive cuts in primary and secondary schooling. We have concerns that are still on the table, the higher ed reforms, and proposed cuts to vocational education and training. I think when you look at the economy broadly, we need more skilled people. We've already commented about the fact that we don't have enough STEM skills in our economy, and we need to be able to address that into the longer term to meet the needs of industry both now and into the future. And I think there was a missed opportunity to correct some of that spending that had been removed by the Abbott government that we had sought to underpin with some pretty tough savings ourselves when we were in office. And I think that's probably one of the big problems with this budget, is that at its heart it retains those massive cuts to education.
I know one of the issues that you have a particular interest in, and that's around innovation, entrepreneurship, startups and so forth. It seems to be something that is also being addressed by this government. It was intertwined through some of the small business announcements. Is it going far enough? Because certainly the rhetoric from the government is that they do see it as being a future driver of growth. There's obviously mining investment tails off, but from the people that you speak to, and which I know you do, is there enough being provided to help spur that innovation, that entrepreneurship in the country?
I think that people were interested in the rhetoric and aren't necessarily impressed with the reality matching that rhetoric. There is, obviously. I mean, I think it's important that both sides of politics talk about innovation and the importance for us as mining is starting to decline in terms of the strength of its contribution to our economy. We need to get ready for the future, and a lot of this work is critical to the nation's future prosperity. But a lot of the things that have been brought in terms of the concessions themselves, I think will miss the mark for startups. We're definitely working together on employee share options, and that legislation will be debated shortly, and I think both sides of politics are committed to getting this through without much fuss. I think the crowdsourced equity funding that was announced, or the funding that is set aside to bring that in, 7.8 off the top of my head million, really is about helping ASIC get some of the standardised documentation that would help investors when they're seeking the funding. But we're a long way off, James, in seeing legislation which even the government admits. And we've said to them, look, we're prepared to work with you on this. Let's bring that avenue, that funding avenue to life. Let's work together to make it happen. But the announcements they made in this budget do not equal crowdsourced equity funding in the short term, and it's nearly a year since CAMAC brought down its independent report detailing how to bring in things like crowdsourced equity funding to support startups. So I think there is a long way to go, but at least it's on the radar, at least it's in the public domain for discussion, at least, and we certainly from the Labor side recognise the value of innovation in terms of spurring on economic activity, and we're prepared to work with the government to drive this even further.
And Husic, do have to leave it there, but thank you.